Joined now by Salaamedia's legal reporter Ayesha Vahed, who was watching those developments quite closely. Ayesha, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Recap for us today's developments. The Palestinian representatives at the International Court of Justice, what arguments did they present today?
Good evening, and thanks for having me. So basically, we started off with the Palestinian delegation, as is fitting. So we heard from the state of Palestine, and they started off very strongly. Dr. Riyad, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he started off with a strong address, and his address focused on the fact that the Palestinian people are struggling daily, and the continuous plan of Israel to annex the land. So that's what he focused on, and he stated in frustration that no occupying power can be granted a permanent veto, on its occupied people. We heard after that about jurisdiction, and Professor Andreas Zimmerman spoke to us about jurisdiction, and he said that there's no compelling reason for the court not to hear this case. And it's a known fact in law that when a court does not have good reason not to hear a case, then they will hear a case in the interest of justice. So jurisdiction was also, qualified quite well. And he also made mention of the fact that no meaningful dialogue can be had with Israel. And I think that's quite important for us. Israel is not interested in meaningful dialogue. They're not interested in finding a solution that recognizes the Palestinian people, that gives them human rights, that stops the annexation of them, that stops the displacement of them. Israel wants to erase the Palestinian people in all ways possible. We then had Mr. Paul Richter, who spoke on the illegality of Israel's prolonged occupation, the annexation and settlement on Palestinian land, the various violations of international law. And he said that the maximum occupation with the minimum amount of Palestinians living on it is what is currently happening in Palestine. He emphasized that the passage of time does not justify annexation of a people. It doesn't matter how long that this has been carrying on for. We cannot simply say that the Palestinian people lost their land such a long time ago that it no longer matters. It's still their land. They were forced out of it. It was a forcible displacement, and the wrongs have to be righted. I think a very important question by Mr. Paul Richter was, how far will the U.S. go in defending Israel, and in disregarding international law? And he answered his own question. He said that very far. The U.S. is willing to go very far to disregard international law, and it's up to the court to make sure that these countries comply with international law and to enforce every mechanism that it can. And he ended off very strongly by saying that the court is the last hope for Palestinians. Palestinians don't even have any hope of a dialogue with Israel in terms of a two-state solution. So the court is the last hope for them, and he pleaded to the court to help them.
So Paul Richter, the legal representative, highlighting some other fundamental issues. For example, what does he have to say about what the fundamental objective of the occupation is? So, the fundamental objective of the occupation is to erase the Palestinian people. It's to displace them and to create more settlements and to push them out. And what we can see happening right now in Rafah is just that the Palestinian people no longer have any place to go to. There's 2 million people that they're on the border and they're being killed daily. Just today, I think there were 176 of them murdered. So the final goal of the occupation is to erase the Palestinian people in every way possible. And we've seen that hospitals have been targeted, universities have been targeted, residential areas have been targeted. The occupation, or Israel, has made it quite clear that it wants to erase the Palestinian people in totality, and the Palestine and the other states to this application to the court are pleading with the court to intervene. So appealing to the court to declare the treatment and the practices of Israel as discriminatory and tantamount to apartheid, what are they hoping to get out of that declaration?
So they are hoping that once the court gives its advisory opinion, which is, it is a non-binding opinion, but it's been shown to set, precedent in law quite often. And also the United Nations asked for this advisory opinion.
So what the Palestinians and the rest of the delegation are hoping for is that once the court comes out and says, look, this is apartheid, this is a violation of human rights, this needs to be stopped, then Israel will have to abide through force. And by force, I mean by other countries now imposing sanctions, by other countries stopping their military aid, by other countries coming through and saying, you know what, we are not going to fund this anymore because we are in breach of international law. So I think it's unprecedented because 52 states have decided to take part in these proceedings to put pressure on the court, to put pressure on the UN to change something.
Yeah. The rather visibly emotional Riyad Mansour, which we played just moments ago, believing strongly, I mean, is that what the Palestinian people believe, that the legal consequence from this determination will lead to a just and lasting peace?
You know, I think the Palestinian people are taking every avenue that they can in order for their self-determination to be realized and in order to get granted their freedom and basic human rights. And this case is unprecedented. The ICJ has never heard such a big case before. It's never had 52 states appearing on, on behalf of a state before them. This is unprecedented. So yes, I think the Palestinians are really hopeful that by giving these submissions and by the strong advisory opinion that comes out of the court, it will put enough pressure on the United Nations to call for emergency measures. It will lead to a ceasefire, and it will lead to the long-term self-determination of the Palestinian people and an end to the apartheid and occupation.
So the proceedings are resuming again tomorrow. What are we likely who are we likely going to be hearing from?
So we are hearing from South Africa tomorrow, and that will be the main focus. And then we're going to hear from some of the Arab countries. We're also hearing from the Netherlands as well. So that will be interesting as the ICJ is based here. And as you know, this week, the Dutch government was stopped from sending F-35 parts to Israel any longer. And that was a high court ruling here. So we'll hear from the Netherlands what it thinks and where it stands on Palestine. And I think in these proceedings, the majority of states are in favor of Palestine, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that the US and the UK are also making application to the court. So we can expect that there will be some support in favor of Israel as well.
While you're there, I mean, the hope is that this will lead to some sort of geopolitical change, but also there are some who believe that change will not necessarily come from the UN Security Council because the United States and the UK will probably veto such proposals. So where does it go?
You know, the veto is the biggest problem, I think, and it's obviously every resolution for a ceasefire has been vetoed by the United States, and people sort of are wondering what's the point. But the UN does have the power to call for emergency measures if the member states are failing to realize a good objective, or they're failing the safety of a state, and it can call for that. So we're hoping that with an advisory opinion, it will put pressure on even the UN. The UN has asked for this opinion by the court, and once it gets a strong advisory opinion back, then emergency measures can be put in place. That has to be asked for by a member of the Security Council or a few members of the General Assembly. So that's the hopes, and that's what people are hoping for, and that will lead to assistance for the Palestinian people. Assistance in terms of those emergency measures can be military assistance, assistance in terms of boycotts and sanctions. It can be assistance in many different ways. So we're hoping for that strong advisory opinion from the court, which will lead to pressure on the United Nations and subsequently to firstly a ceasefire and then the self-determination and end of the occupation.
If you were to sum up, what did the Palestinian legal team show us today?
The Palestinian legal team showed us that Palestinians are living daily in an apartheid regime. They don't have the basic right to, hospitals. They don't have the basic right to food, to basic necessities, to access their own homeland. They live behind an illegal wall, rather. They've experienced the destruction of their homes. Settlements that are illegal are removing them from their own properties. There's an erasure of Palestinian culture. They've shown us that there's illegal detention. Children, they focus so much on children. Dr. Riyad Malki and Dr. Riyad Mansour both focus so much on children and how children are growing up in the occupation. They're not seen as children at all. Dr. Namira Negam spoke about how Palestinian children are dehumanized to the point of being called snakes by the government. And collectively, all of them spoke about, children being allowed to grow up as children and not as a demographic threat any longer.
Ayesha, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Ayesha Vahed reporting for Salaamedia.